All right. Just like a verbal yes, can everybody see my presentation? Everybody able to see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank
Yes.
you so much. Great. Great, great. So yeah, so thanks everybody for being here tonight. My name is Carl Blair. I am TCRP's Senior Election Protection Attorney. And this is the first of our series in our deep dive, democracy deep dive series, right? So our team, our voting rights team here at TCRP, we like to put on presentations like this for the public, for civic organizations, for just our fellow Texas voters to kind of dive deep into some of these issues about voting rights, about election protection, how our elections actually work in Texas. And so tonight, like I said, this is going to be the first in a series of 4 presentations, and we're going to be talking about Texas's voter registration laws. So with that, we have a couple of housekeeping things I wanted to get into for everybody. First, for those of y'all who may not be familiar with TCRP, we are the Texas Civil Rights Project is our full name. We are a nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded back in 1990. And currently we have 3 programs in our organization. We have a Beyond Borders team that deals with border and immigration issues. We have a criminal legal team that deals with criminal justice reform. And then the team I'm a part of is voting rights. And we deal with voting rights and election protection. And so here in the voting rights team, we advocate for our fellow Texas voters through every step of the voting process, from registering to vote all the way to casting your votes, casting your ballots and beyond. I do have our website down at the bottom of this slide. It's txcivilrights.org. Please give our website a look. We put lots of election resources up there before every election we have. So we have a lot of valuable resources on our website as well. As I mentioned, this is the first in a 4-part democracy deep dive series. We are going to be talking about Texas voter registration laws today, election resource allocation next Tuesday, and I put the Zoom registration link there for the other 3 presentations. On Tuesday, September 23rd, we're going to be talking about voting machines. And then on September 30th, we're going to have a presentation on UACAVA, which is a very short version. That's the law that allows active duty service members, their family, and U.S. citizens living overseas. It allows them and affords them the right to vote in federal elections by mail. So yeah, if any of those are of interest to you, urge you to sign up at those registration links. They are also going to be posted on our YouTube channel within a couple of days of each one of those presentations as well. I see I have a couple of people in the waiting room, so I'm going to switch over, let them in, and then we'll jump back onto the presentation. All right. We do have a special thanks to give to the American Constitution Society and their Austin, DFW, and Houston chapters. They're working with us to sponsor and promote this deep dive series. It's really great getting to work with them. Super happy that I get the opportunity to do so. If you're unfamiliar with the organization, I went ahead and put their website in that hyperlink up there. But huge thanks and shout out to them for sponsoring this presentation series. All right. One more disclaimer, one more housekeeping notice. I do want to just say that this presentation is for educational purposes only, and it doesn't create any type of attorney-client relationship between TCRP and anyone attending the presentation tonight or anybody who views this presentation later. Also just want to note that, as we'll see through this presentation, this is a really extensive and a complicated issue. So no single presentation can be 100% comprehensive about every potential, compliance related topic. So we try and be as thorough as possible, and but it's not 100% comprehensive. If you are working with an organization, whether you're employee, volunteer, staffer, if an organization that you're affiliated with ever becomes the subject of an investigation, please engage and inquire with a reputable lawyer who can help guide you and your organization through those circumstances. All right. And like I said, we are going to have a question and answer session. Unfortunately, I'm not able to look at the chat while I'm in presentation mode. So go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat. When we get to the end of the presentation, we'll circle back and see what questions are there. All right, and so with that, let's go ahead and dive into the actual material. So let's give a presentation overview. I always like to give kind of a roadmap of what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to split this into 4 parts. So the first part is going to go into actual detail about these voter registration laws. And I do want to just say tonight we're going to be focusing mainly on volunteer deputy registrars or VDRs. So we're going to talk about their powers, their duties, the eligibility to be a VDR. So we're going to learn about how they can distribute and review applications, how they can accept completed applications, and how they can deliver completed applications. And just want to say, as a quick note up front, if you hear me use the term applications here, unless I say otherwise, I'm talking about voter registration applications in particular. So part 2 of this presentation is going to deal with some voter registration laws that carry criminal penalties attached to them. That's a pay-per-vote prohibition. Talk about that. It has some implications for organizations that deal with voter registration work. Then we're also going to talk about the vote harvesting law. What is vote harvesting in Texas? And then we're going to talk about something called the vote harvesting organizations law, which is closely tied to the vote harvesting law. Part 3 is a really short part. It's only a couple of slides, but it's just some pointers for C3 organizations that deal with voter registration work. Just some compliance pointers for them to keep in mind as they're doing their work. And then, of course, part 4 is the question and answer session that I mentioned previously. All right, and so with all of that housekeeping out of the way, we can dive into actually talking about Texas's voter registration laws. So like I said, we're going to talk about the volunteer deputy registrars. That they're going to be our main focus tonight. So we're going to talk about their powers, duty, and how you become a volunteer deputy registrar in Texas. So we're going to start by asking, what is a VDR? So it's a volunteer deputy registrar. That's the whole name. So they're a volunteer because they are not the county registrar or a paid county employee. They can be a paid employee or a volunteer at another organization, a 501c3 organization, or even a partisan organization. But they are not a paid county employee. Then there's also deputy registrar. What does that mean? That means the VDRs are deputized by the county's voter registrar to assist in registering voters. And the VDR system that we have in place it was created in the 1980s. And the stated purpose of the VDR system at the time was to encourage voter participation. So just want to keep in mind that is, at least theoretically, the entire purpose of having this entire VDR system in place. All right, so I thought a good place to start would be, what are the requirements for actually becoming a VDR, right? So a person who wants to be a VDR, they have to meet the requirements to be a qualified voter in Texas. So that means U.S. citizen, Texas resident, at least 18 years of age, no felony conviction unless their sentence has been fully discharged, or they've been pardoned or otherwise released from their disability to vote. There are further requirements, of course, to be a voter in Texas, but those are pretty much the two largest, most important qualifications that would most likely touch any potential VDRs. The second thing is that VDRs must complete a Secretary of State approved VDR training and an examination. We'll talk about those two aspects a little bit more in detail, a little bit farther in the presentation, but just keep in mind that the Secretary of State does have to create a VDR training and an examination, and everybody who wants to be appointed as a VDR has to pass and complete that training and presentation. So one thing I did want to note is that VDRs do not actually have to be a registered voter. There's some confusion about that. Some people have asked us whether, VDRs that they're employing on their staff have to be registered to vote to actually work as a VDR. Same with their volunteers. The answer is no. VDRs do not have to actually be a registered voter. They just have to meet the qualifications to be a registered voter. So what are the term and powers of VDRs? In other words, how long are you a VDR? How long does your appointment last? Well, every VDR appointment expires on December 31st of an even numbered year, right? Every single VDR appointment in the state of Texas. So it doesn't matter if you became a VDR tomorrow, September 10th, 2025, your appointment would expire December 31st of 2026. If you waited a year from today and you became a VDR in September of 2026, that same appointment is still going to expire at the end of December next year. So functionally, what does that mean if you're, working in an organization that does voter registration work? That just means that anybody that was certified as a VDR for last year's elections, they have to go through the certification process again for next year's elections. And so, what are the statutory powers under the Texas Election Code that VDRs have? What is their legal responsibility, their legal authority, right? Well, VDRs can distribute voter registration applications throughout the county that they are appointed in. And importantly, they can also receive and deliver completed voter registration applications submitted to them in person. So they have to receive them in person and deliver them in person as well. We're obviously going to go ahead and talk about, what that actually entails on the ground in detail. But just keep those in mind. That's what VDRs have the authority to actually do under the Texas Election Code. All right. So, kind of the flip side of how you become certified or appointed as a VDR would be, what happens if your VDR appointment is terminated, right? So, one of the things that county registrars do, and they're the officials, obviously, that register voters, they maintain our voter rolls on the county level, but they also conduct ongoing oversight and supervision over all VDRs in their county, right? That is something that they are legally required to do. So, a county registrar, and I want to be real careful with the language here because, if we have any fellow attorneys on the call, you all understand the difference between may and must, in statutory language. So I just want to make sure that I'm very clear about this. So county registrars may terminate a VDR's appointment for a failure to adequately review a completed application, or, and this is a direct quote from the election code, any other activities that conflict with the responsibilities of a VDR. So they have the discretion, the county registrar has the discretion to terminate a VDR's appointment in those cases. However, the county registrar must terminate a VDR's appointment for a conviction under the performance-based pay provisions that we'll talk about later in the presentation, or for a failure by the VDR to deliver completed applications on time. We'll talk about what those deadlines are later as well. So in those two cases, the county registrar does not have any discretion. They have to terminate that VDR's appointment in those situations. So something that is extremely, extremely important, and again, if you're working with VDRs, you definitely want them to understand this point. If a VDR has their appointment terminated in a county, they absolutely cannot handle or accept completed voter registration applications from that county. Right? That is absolutely something that they cannot do. And so, like I said, if you are working with VDRs, you want to make sure that they understand that point very clearly. All right, so this is just kind of like a practical slide here. It's not really something that's heavy on the law on this particular side, but just, it's a question that's been asked before to myself and my team. So just wanted to kind of address this here. And that's just what supplies should VDRs actually carry with them while they're performing their duties, while they're out distributing voter registration applications and accepting completed applications. So this is kind of what we came up with. First, they should carry their certificate of appointment with them, right? That's, of course, the document from the county registrar that says, this person is a VDR. Excuse me. This person is a VDR. They have this legal authority to be doing this type of work. Second, of course, they need to actually have their voter registration applications with them, of course, there's also a receipt book that they need to carry with them. We'll talk about the requirements of that in a couple of slides as well. And then we also would recommend that they carry a copy of the Texas Secretary of State's VDR guide. You can get it as a PDF on that link that's on that bullet point. And some counties like to provide their VDRs with extra material. So it may just be something like, here's the time and address where we need you to drop off the voter registration applications, whatever that may be. But if their county that appoints them as a VDR does provide them with any other materials, it's probably a good idea to have those available as well. So if you notice, those first three items have an asterisk after them. That's because these are considered election materials that are issued to a VDR. And I just wanted to note that any of these election materials that are issued to the VDR must be returned to the appointing county no later than the second day after a VDR receives a notice of termination. So if you are working with a VDR who has their appointment terminated, they need to return all of these election materials, the certificate of appointment, registration applications, receipt book. They need to return those within 2 days of getting that notice of termination. All right, so now we can kind of shift forward a little bit and talk about the distribution and review of voter registration applications. What is the VDR's role in that process? And so we're going to talk about the review requirements. What is a VDR actually required to review? We are going to talk about the receipt book that I mentioned on the last slide. We're going to talk about something called the no photocopying rule as well, and then what confidential information is actually included on a voter registration application. So in terms of distributing applications, a VDR may distribute a blank voter application that's from the Secretary of State to any eligible voter, regardless of the county, right? So how can you tell if a voter application is from the Secretary of State or from a county? You're going to have to look at the return address on the application. If it's a return address to the Secretary of State's office in Austin, they can be handed out to any voter, any eligible voter. No problem whatsoever. If it has a specific county, if it says return to, I live in Fort Bend, so if it said return to the Fort Bend election administrator, then those county specific forms should only be given out to voters who are registering in that county. So for anybody who may not be aware of what a voter registration application actually looks like, this is a screenshot of it. You can see there are multiple pieces of information that need to be provided. And a couple of these are considered confidential information. We'll circle back to that in a couple of slides. But this is what they're going to look like. And they're going to look this way, whether it's a county-specific form or whether it's the Secretary of State's application. That's why you have to look at the return address. All right, so when we talk about reviewing applications, what do we mean there? So a VDR has to review for completeness in the applicant's presence, right? So what does that mean? So if we go back a slide, all of these pieces of information need to be filled. All of these boxes need to be checked. They need to be filled out. So when a VDR is handed an application to somebody, that person fills out their form, they hand it back to the VDR. While that person is still there, if at all possible, the VDR needs to check for completion, right? They need to make sure that all of the required boxes are filled out or checked. The application is signed and dated. So that needs to be done, right? So one thing that is extremely important is that the VDR should confirm the applicant's county of residence, right? So, a lot of our big cities in particular, they are located in multiple different counties. I crunched the numbers one time, and just to get, a Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio covered, all the city limits, you would have to be a VDR in, I think it was 18 different counties, right? So, there are little pieces of Houston that are in a couple of different counties, same with Dallas and Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio. So all of that's to say that it's really, really important that, especially in bigger cities, it's really important that your VDRs confirm the the applicant's county of residence. And then if the registration application is incomplete, the VDR needs to give it back to the applicant to complete. And then you just restart the review for completeness process again, right? So as many times as it takes to get all of that required information actually put on there. Just a reminder that one of the reasons that a county registrar may terminate a VDR's appointment is for a failure to adequately review a completed application. So what that will frequently play out as in real life is that somebody does forget to fill out one of those boxes and the VDR misses it, right? So it's not something that every county is going to automatically terminate somebody for, but it is something that they can terminate a VDR for. So, again, if you're working with any VDRs or you're a VDR yourself, you're going to want to make sure to have the applicant actually fill out all of the required information. And then per the Secretary of State's office, a VDR may not determine if an applicant is actually qualified to vote. That's not the VDR's responsibility. It's not their legal authority to do that. That is actually the responsibility and authority of the county registrar. And then second, a VDR may not make an applicant provide their gender or their telephone number. So there are boxes for both of those pieces of information on the application. Those two boxes, though, the VDR can't require or make the applicant fill out. All right, so let's talk about registration receipts. I mentioned a receipt book a couple of slides ago. So this is what the registration receipt looks like. It has the name of the applicant, name of the VDR, VDR signature, and some other information that they're going to fill out based on their receipt book on the right-hand side. So when does this come into play? So after an applicant hands in a completed voter registration application to a VDR, the VDR prepares one of these registration receipts in duplicate on the form that's going to be furnished by the county registrar. So they're going to get all these forms when they're appointed from the county registrar. So the VDR has to sign the application. Sign the registration receipt in the applicant's presence. They give the original to the applicant, and they deliver the duplicate to the county registrar's office when they turn in that voter registration application. Right. So it's very important. This is something that needs to be done. Again, whether you're working with VDRs or you are a VDR yourself, make sure that these registration receipts are turned in a timely fashion with their corresponding application. All right, so I had mentioned something called the no photocopying rule. The Secretary of State has given guidance out that says that photocopies of completed applications are not allowed because some of the documents contain confidential information. But copies of the receipts that we talked about on the previous slide, those can be made and those can be kept by VDRs. So I just want to note that this prohibition isn't explicitly stated in the election code, but it is the current guidance given by the Secretary of State. So our advice is that VDRs follow that guidance. All right, and so what information is actually considered confidential on the voter registration applications? Simply put, it's the telephone number and then the Texas driver's license number or the last 4 digits of a person's social security number. Those pieces of information are considered confidential information under Texas law, and that's the justification that the Secretary of State gave for prohibiting photocopying completed applications. All right, so let's talk briefly about the acceptance of completed applications. So we're going to talk about 3 main things here: the county limitation rule, penalties in this area, and then something called reciprocity. So the county limitation, this is a screenshot from the Secretary of State's Volunteer Deputy Registrar Guide. So the county limitation rules basically say that if you are appointed in a specific county as a VDR, that is the county in which you can accept completed applications from, right? So if you are, again, go back since I live in Fort Bend, if you are a VDR in Fort Bend and you're not appointed anywhere else, you're only a VDR in Fort Bend, then you can only accept completed voter registration applications for folks trying to register in Fort Bend County. You can't accept them from neighboring Harris County or Montgomery County or Galveston County, only Fort Bend County. So, whatever county your VDR is appointed in, that is the county that they can accept completed applications from. So there is no way to be a statewide VDR, right? You can't just get one piece of paper from the Secretary of State's office that says, hey, you can accept registrations from all 254 counties. It has to be done on a county by county basis. So let's do a quick recap on distributing blank forms and accepting completed forms. Preferably, the county voter registrars provide VDRs with those applications containing the county's return address that we mentioned a couple of slides ago. And again, just to reiterate, those applications should only be distributed to applicants residing in that specific county. If the VDR receives generic applications containing the Secretary of State's return address, they can distribute those forms to anyone residing in any county. However, going along with the county limitation that we just talked about last page, the VDR can only accept those applications from applicants registering within the county in which they are appointed. So it just kind of reinforces that, if you are appointed in a specific county, that's the county that you can accept completed forms from, even if it's one of those blank Secretary of State return address forms. All right, so next we're going to talk about reciprocity and what that means in the VDR context. We'll just go through this question here. Again, another screenshot from the Secretary of State's VDR guide. Um, Question is, if I've previously taken the volunteer deputy registrar exam and received a certificate of appointment in one county, but would like to be appointed as a VDR in another county, am I required to take the examination again in the new county? The answer is no. Once you have taken a VDR exam, once you've gone through the training materials and once you've taken a VDR exam in one county, you've been appointed in that county, you do not have to take that exam or go through that training again to become a VDR in another county. What the VDR does have to do, they do have to affirmatively and proactively seek out and receive a certificate of appointment from the county registrar in the new county, right? So going back to Fort Bend County, if I was a VDR in Fort Bend and I wanted to become a VDR in Harris County, I would reach out to the Harris County, in this case, the tax assessor collector's office, reach out to their office, provide documentation that I have a certificate of appointment as a VDR in Fort Bend County, let them know that I want to become a VDR in Harris County. They would go ahead and give me a certificate of appointment for Harris County as well in that case. They can't make me retake the exam. They can't make me go back through the training materials. In that case, they would just be legally required to provide me with a certificate of appointment in that second county. All right, so you've heard me mention training and exam in this area a couple of times now. What does the law actually say about that training and that exam? So it's split up between the Secretary of State and then the county registrars. They both have responsibilities in this area. So on the Secretary of State side, they adopt statewide training standards relating to voter registration, including actually writing the exam. They developed a standardized curriculum for the training, and then they make the VDR curriculum and exam available on their website. On the county side, the county registrars may adopt the Secretary of State's training and exam, or they may develop county-specific procedures, but those county-specific procedures still have to be approved by the Secretary of State. Just a side note, most counties don't go through that extra step. They just automatically kind of default to using the Secretary of State's training and examination. So county registrars must also administer the exam at a time during regular business hours, right? They have to have at least some method to take the exam during their regular business hours. They are not, however, required to hold in-person training sessions for potential VDRs. They can do hybrid, they can do virtual options, they can do in-person. And then upon passage of the exam by a potential VDR, they must appoint that person as a VDR and then let them know if they have any additional procedures that they will need to follow. So in other words, once a person has gone through the training, they've gone through the examination, the county cannot then come back and say, oh, we're not going to appoint you as a VDR. They have to go ahead and appoint that person as a VDR. So I do want to note just very briefly that the VDR training and testing schedules vary widely by county. So all counties are required to host some form of VDR training. However, the methods of training and the amount and times of the training offered vary widely between counties. What we'll frequently see is bigger counties have a wider variety of virtual and in-person options, a wider variety of times when to take it. Smaller counties typically have a smaller variety of options and times to choose from. Some counties you can go ahead and just request the training and exam online. Other counties you'll actually have to call the county registrar's office to set up an in-person training and examination time. All right, let's talk the last portion of this part of the presentation. That's the delivery of completed applications. So we're going to talk about the delivery in person requirement, deadlines, and then penalties. So a VDR must deliver a completed voter registration application to the county registrar in person or through another designated VDR for that county, right? So if they receive an application in person, they can give it to another VDR who is also appointed in that same county to deliver that registration to the county registrar in person. VDRs may not take a completed application and drop it in the mail or give a completed application to a non-VDR for delivery. And we'll see what some of the penalties are for those later. What are the deadlines? The completed applications have to be delivered by 5 p.m. of the 5th day after receipt by the VDR. And I just want to note here that's not business days, it is calendar days. And then there's a brief window, 34 days and between 34 days and 29 days before election day, right? The voter registration deadline is 30 days before election day. So 34 days and 29 days before election day, any completed voter registration applications have to be delivered by 5 p.m. of the 29th day before election day. Just know that that little 5 day period is kind of a potential danger zone for organizations. So again, if you're working with VDRs or you are a VDR, if you get applications in that day, if at all possible, it's probably best practice to try and drop them off every day. I know that may be logistically challenging, but that's the best bet to make sure that none of the applications that you or the VDRs you're working with fall through the cracks. So any violations of this delivery requirements, they are a Class C misdemeanor. So it's a Class C misdemeanor to fail to deliver a completed application on time, to have a non-VDR or a VDR who isn't registered in that county deliver the application, or to deliver a completed application by mail. Those are all Class C misdemeanors. All right, and with that, we're going to shift over to part 2, which is the voter registration laws with criminal penalties. And like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about prohibitions against performance-based pay and then vote harvesting as well. So I put some citations here to the election code in case you want to actually view the language yourself. But the performances against performance-based pay, they affect voter registration organizations, of course, their requirements on how they set up their payment schedules, their payroll. So what organizations cannot do under this provision of the election code, they can't compensate a person based on the number of registrations that person successfully facilitates. That's a direct language from the election code. They can't give anyone a quota of voter registrations to facilitate as a condition of their payment or employment. They can't engage in any practice that causes a person's compensation or employment to be dependent on the number of voter registrations that individual or the organization as a whole facilitates. And they can't accept any compensation for any of those type of activities, right? So you can't give somebody, you can't say, hey, we're going to pay you $1 for every voter registration application that you successfully facilitate. Nor could you say, hey, we're going to require that you successfully facilitate 100 voter registration applications every 2 weeks, right? Neither one of those are legal and under the Texas Election Code. Good news, if you are a voter registration organization, is that this is one of the easiest pitfalls for organizations to avoid, but it does require a little planning and foresight on your organization's part. So any violations of these prohibitions are a Class A misdemeanor. That's fine up to $4,000, could potentially be jail of up to a year or both. If it's part of a vote harvesting organization, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes, that is bumped all the way up to a state jail felony, which is a minimum 6 months to 2 years in jail, or a minimum of 6 months up to 2 years in jail, and a fine of up to $10,000. So it gets bumped up from a Class A misdemeanor to a state jail felony if it's found to be part of a vote harvesting organization. So there is potential liability for officers, directors, and agents of an organization for violations of these performance-based pay prohibitions. This is a direct quote. An officer, director, or other agent of an entity that commits an offense is punishable for the offense. So this is a situation where the organization as a whole and its officers, leadership, their staffers, there is potential liability for the organization on this. Something that you can do if you're working in this type of organization, penalties are obviously very severe here, but they're also the most easily preventable here. Our best recommendation is to just put control procedures in place before your organization's busy season, right? We all know that voter registration organizations, especially leading up to the voter registration deadline, those are some of the busiest times of year for them. So you're going to want any procedures in place to prevent this type of performance-based pay to be put into place before these busy seasons start. If you work for an organization that doesn't directly hire VDRs or bring them on as volunteers, if you use contractors for it, you might want to consider hold harmless language or other contract provisions. All right, so let's shift over to vote harvesting and the vote harvesting organizations laws. So question to ask here is what exactly is vote harvesting, right? So vote harvesting is when a person, either directly or through a third party, provides or offers to provide, quote, vote harvesting services in exchange for compensation or other benefit. You also can't directly or again through a third party knowingly provide or offer to provide compensation or other benefit to another person in exchange for vote harvesting services, right? So you can't provide vote harvesting services in exchange for compensation yourself, nor can you hire somebody and pay them to provide you with vote harvesting services. But do you want to know that vote harvesting is a third-degree felony, which carries up to 2 to 10 years imprisonment and a $10,000 fine. So it's a very harsh penalty here. Okay, but what are vote harvesting services? They use that phrase multiple times in that provision. What does that actually mean? Well, vote harvesting services are in-person interactions with one or more voters in the physical presence of an official ballot or a ballot voted by mail, and they have to be intended to deliver votes for a specific candidate or measure. And what's a benefit? That's anything that can reasonably be regarded as a gain or advantage. That's promise or offer of employment, political favor, an official act of discretion, obviously an actual payment, whether it's to that specific person or to another party whose welfare is of interest to that person. So, a benefit could be, hey, we will give you $1,000 if you do this. Likewise, a benefit could be, we will hire your cousin as a county employee if you do this for us, right? So are there any exceptions, or are there any types of, get out the vote activities, voter registration activities that are not considered or that are exempt from being considered vote harvesting? Yeah, there absolutely are. So this section specifically doesn't apply to any activity not performed in exchange for compensation or benefit. It doesn't apply to any interactions that don't occur in the presence of a ballot or during the voting process. It also doesn't apply to any interactions that don't directly involve an official ballot or a mail-in ballot. Doesn't apply to any interactions that aren't conducted in person with a voter, or any activity that is not designed to deliver votes for or against a specific candidate or measure. And so you may be asking, well, we're talking about voter registration. That type of activity is pretty clearly exempt from here. But as we all know, a lot of organizations that do voter registration activities also do get out the vote work. So we wanted to make sure that everybody who is attending tonight, everybody who watches this on our YouTube channel, that kind of gets the full view of these types of laws as well. So this specific section of the election code is currently under litigation. In full disclosure, TCRP is one of the lead counsels for this litigation. The litigation is called Lupe versus Abbott. It has been found currently, this is current as of the date of the presentation. This section of the election code has been found to violate both the First and 14th Amendment and to be preempted by Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act. That section of the Voting Rights Act allows voters to choose someone to assist them in completing their ballot. And then portions of this section of the election code have also been found to violate the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. However, this is a huge caveat. All of these orders that found those violations, they're currently on appeal to the Fifth Circuit, and the vote harvesting provision that we talked about last couple of slides currently remains in effect while this appeal is being considered. All right, so that was the Vote Harvesting Act. Closely related is the Vote Harvesting Organization Law. So what the Vote Harvesting Organization Law is it's a penalty enhancer, right? It increases all criminal penalties one level for any person who commits or conspires to commit a violation of VDR laws or any other election laws while participating in a vote harvesting organization. All right, so there's obviously a couple of things that we need to go through and kind of clarify in that definition. So what is a vote harvesting organization? So a vote harvesting organization is 3 or more persons who collaborate in committing offenses under Titles 1 through 7 of the Election Code. That's the entire election code. Even if participants don't know each other's identities, or they can stand in what's known as an arm's length relationship. So that could be a donor and a consultant. a donor and a field operative, lawyer and a volunteer, a lawyer and a field operative, etc. So even with that definition, we can see that it's very broad. It's simultaneously overly broad, yet also vague as well. So I just want to clarify and provide a note here that Vote Harvesting Act that we talked about last section, and then this Vote Harvesting Organization Law, they are very broad. They are also very vague. So that's kind of a legal concept that something can be overly broad and vague at the same time. Both of these provisions definitely suffer from that infirmity. So what are some of the implications for organizations under this vote harvesting organization law? Well, as I mentioned, the VHO law, it enhances the criminal penalty for the person committing the underlying offense. So what does that mean? That means that it's actually the VDR who doesn't turn in the applications that would be under criminal penalty. It doesn't necessarily mean that any other member of the organization would be liable, right? Furthermore, any collaboration among members of an organization may create the vote harvesting organization for purposes of a penalty enhancement. But again, that doesn't mean that any other members except for that one individual who committed the crime would be liable. And then to further complicate matters, to actually show that, for instance, a VDR, an organization head, and the organization's lawyer, right? Just to give a hypothetical, just to show that the three of them would be a vote harvesting organization. You'd have to show that they specifically collaborated in committing offenses, right? That could be very difficult. I do want to note that there is a particular situation out in Frio County, an alleged vote harvesting vote harvesting in Frio County that happened just over the summer. So between May and June of this year, so just last couple of months, 16 people out in Frio County, including the Frio County judge, former county elections administrator, a couple of city council members, ISD school board trustees, campaign workers. 16 people were indicted for vote harvesting. And to see how this might be playing out in real life, some of the allegations include payments made via Cash App to fill out mail-in ballots, to pick those ballots up, to drive voters to vote curbside, to try and get them to vote a specific way. And also the allegations included that the vote harvesting services were provided in exchange for money, gas, lunches, county employment, right? So it's still very early in the process. The Attorney General's office is being fairly tight-lipped about the specifics of the allegations that are being alleged, but it is something that is worth following. It's also one of the few. It's also one of the first major vote harvesting organization and vote harvesting act violations that is being prosecuted. So it will be kind of interesting to see how this process is handled in the courts. So just a couple of quick thoughts on the vote harvesting provisions. As I mentioned, these are overly broad and vague at the same time. They do have very little substantive judicial history to them. So having said that, it's perfectly understandable why these provisions in particular worry a lot of voter registration organizations. And this would be a situation if you have any questions or concerns about a potential organizational liability under these provisions, that's the time to reach out to your organization's lawyer as soon as possible. Don't delay that communications with your lawyer about those. All right, and so next to last section, I promise we are almost to the end. This is just a couple of slides that go over some C3 compliance pointers for voter registration organizations specifically. So the first are just kind of some general activities that all C3 organizations should try and avoid. Because one of the major requirements of C3 organizations is that they maintain a strict nonpartisanship. So if you are a volunteer with a 501c3, if you are an employee, if you're a leader at a 501c3, while you're officially representing that organization, you're going to want to avoid making any statements that favor or oppose a candidate or a political party at any organizational event, any meeting. You're going to want to keep them out of official publications, including off your organization's website. You also are going to want to avoid posting comments that favor or oppose specific candidates or political parties on your organization's social media accounts. You're going to want to avoid forwarding any emails from a candidate or a political party, a partisan PAC, or a partisan political group that came to your organizational email account. Similarly, you're going to want to avoid making statements or handing out literature supportive or critical of a candidate, political party, or PAC at an event that your organization is participating in. And that includes events even if your organization isn't hosting the event or holding the event, just as long as they're participating in it. And then the last one's very easy as well. You're going to want to avoid wearing any political paraphernalia while representing your organization at an event, a meeting, or even around the office. I did provide a resource for everybody there. Nonprofitvote.org has a checklist and kind of a, just a guide to nonpartisan election activities. And they kind of have the same advice there that you're going to want to put these rules into place before election season really kicks off and gets very busy for your organizations. And so how do all of these, what does all this mean in the context specifically of voter registration? Well, VDRs must hand out or accept applications from all voters who request their assistance, regardless of their partisan affiliation, right? You cannot have a VDR say, oh, I'm only going to accept applications from Republican voters, or I'm only going to accept applications from Democratic voters. Can't do that. It has to be from all voters who request their assistance. Again, just one more time, I know y'all have heard me say this about a dozen times now, but just a reminder that VDRs can only accept the applications from voters who are registering in a county where they are appointed as a VDR. If an applicant asks a question that's directly partisan in nature or asks your VDR's opinion of a candidate or a political party, don't respond to them in a partisan fashion, right? You can't do that. An acceptable response, it can obviously be crafted by your organization's philosophy, your goals as an organization, but it's perfectly fine to say something like, I'm sorry, we're a nonpartisan organization. I can't discuss anything partisan with you. That in and of itself is a perfectly acceptable answer in that type of situation. Of course, again, don't wear any clothing or paraphernalia supporting or opposing a candidate or a political party while registering voters. And then make sure that anyone speaking for or on behalf of your organization doesn't make partisan comments either. And so with that, I want to go ahead and open the floor to everybody. But before we do that, I do want to provide everybody for any attorneys who are on the call and who may watch this presentation later. Here's the CLE course number information for the 1 hour of CLE credit that this presentation was accredited for. I will leave that on the screen for just a second. But that is the end of the presentation. We'll jump over to the Q&A session for, looks like we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now so I can open up the chat. All right, everybody. So let's go through the chat. Stella, yes, we will make sure that everybody gets a copy of the slides. Absolutely, for sure. Elaine asked if a felon has completed their sentence and parole and just found out about restitution needed after the state made them a VDR because the restitution is federal and restitution was not part of their original sentence. Can they still be VDR? That's a tricky question. Let me think about that for a second. I would say probably not. I would say that they would probably want to contact their county registrar, ask them. But I would say my initial thought is that no, in that type of situation, that they would not actually be qualified to be a VDR, even though the restitution is federal and not state level. But yeah, that would be a very tricky situation. I would suggest that they reach out to, if they are a member of an organization or employed by an organization, they might want to talk to the organization's lawyers about those specifics. But yeah, that's a great question. That's a very, very tricky situation for sure. Mary asked if the applicant asks a VDR to check a generic mail-in application with the SOS address and the VDR is not certified in the applicant's county of residence. Can the VDR look at the completed form as long as the applicant mails it? The answer to that is probably yes. You know, somebody might ask, hey, did I mark all the boxes that I need to? Did I check all the information that I need to? I wouldn't necessarily see any problem with the VDR doing that. Obviously, the VDR needs to let the applicant handle that since in your hypothetical, the VDR is not registered in that county, or I'm sorry, is not appointed in that county. The applicant would definitely need to hand that ballot. Hand that application in themselves. It would be better in that scenario if you did have a VDR on hand who was appointed in the county where the applicant is actually trying to, apply. But I think just in a generic, just kind of, this would be the information you can fill out. And just in that totally generic way, as long as the VDR makes it clear that they actually are not a VDR in that same county, I think that would probably be okay.
So this is Mary, and it happens mostly at naturalization ceremonies, especially with name changes. They're confused about because they need to revise that form. The box for former name, people's former names are not going to fit in there. The reason they're changing their name is because they want to shorten it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of questions about that. And I'll say, I can look at it for you and this is how you would do it, but you need to mail it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of that is one of the limitations and one of the difficulties is because, we have that county limitation that we talked about. There isn't a statewide method of being a VDR. Yeah. Yeah. You absolutely run into that situation where because I can't actually do this for you. I can just kind of give you generic guidance on how to do it.
Right. Because at naturalizations, you'll have people from, like in San Antonio, the USCIS office covers 68 counties. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's not feasible to have somebody from every one of those counties.
No.
Yeah, I think if you're just giving generic advice and you making sure that you do tell the applicant, I can't handle this for you personally, you're going to have to actually take that next step. I think you're okay.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Stella, what happens if you give VR forms to a VDR and that VDR does turn them or turns them? I assume that means doesn't turn them in or turns them in late. Do you get the blame? Stella, do you as an organization get the blame, or can you give me a little bit more clarification on your question?
I mean, do I, for instance, today I registered folks to vote. And I really was a volunteer for the organization because they were the ones, I guess, who coordinated this. And I'm thinking, well, suppose that person doesn't turn them in or turns them in late. My signature is on the form. So that's what I was concerned about. I mean, I don't expect it, but I just thought about it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is all hypotheticals. Yeah, of course. Yeah, unfortunately, you would be on the hook because your name is on the receipts.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah. So like I said, it's generally not a problem, but yeah, it's absolutely something, you're going to want to make sure that they turn those applications in for sure. Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that section where we were talking about, it's the individual who actually, it's the VDR who doesn't turn in the applications or who doesn't review the applications. They're on the hook. Yeah, and that is one of the Stella, that's a really good example of that situation where yes, you can absolutely have another VDR who's appointed in the same county turn in the applications. But yeah, to your point, you're going to want to make sure that they're trustworthy and that they are actually going to do it. Absolutely. All right. Alexa, you say I was a VDR in good standing in 2 counties, looking to reciprocate in a 3rd county. 3rd county had plenty of hoops to jump through, having to schedule one-on-one, 1-hour training with the county office. Is this just bad form, or is there a chance they may not be compliant with reciprocity standards? They're not. If assuming that's all there was, they're not complying with reciprocity standards. Yeah, that's a plain forward answer. That's just something that's plain. They are not supposed to be able to provide you or have you jump through any hoops. Yeah, that's the whole point of reciprocity. So since we don't have a statewide VDR system, this reciprocity system is in place, so we can have people who can register voters in more than one county. So yeah, that should be something that's not permitted. They can provide you with extra procedures. Again, hey, our county registrar's office is only open Wednesday through Friday from 8 to 4 p.m. Those are our business hours. But that's minor changes, right? That's make sure you drop it in the box in this. Our office is on the second floor of that building. You have to bring it in, from 8 to 4 on Wednesday through Friday, right? Minor things like that. They can't require you to take a full exam, have another one-on-one, another hour training, any of that. Diane, can a group from a particular party register voters on the signage of that party and hand out materials? Particular party. VDRs can be, C4s or partisan organizations can have VDRs. They can. And C4s obviously they can handle things differently than C3s do. So I'm much less of an expert on C4s, to be perfectly honest, since I've spent my entire life on the C3 side almost. But yes, like you can have, for instance, a campaign manager of a candidate's campaign. They can be a VDR. There's nothing that prohibits that. What they are prohibited from doing, even if they are a partisan operative like that, they still have to accept all completed applications and hand out registration applications to any voter. So Dan, yes, to answer your question, yes, they could absolutely do that, but they do need to hand out applications to any applicant who requests them and accept the applications from anybody who returns them. And then I think, Diane, that was actually Priscilla just asked a question. You mentioned that we're not allowed to verify if the applicant is eligible to vote, but what happens if they don't meet the age requirement? Say they're 17 and 3 months, should you still accept the application? Or what if they don't know their county or can verify it? There's no good answer to that question because there are those criminal penalties for failing to deliver a completed application. So it really, really depends on whether the applicant is still there. Can your VDR talk to them, and say, hey, you're 17 years and 3 months. You have to be at least 18 years of age to register. If they're gone, like if they just hand the form over and walk away, your VDR is not able to talk to them in person afterwards. You have to turn in those forms. Hang on just a second, Stella. But yes, if you have a completed form, the applicant's not there to talk to, you have to turn it in. There's no good answer on what to do when you turn it in. My personal advice would be to be very upfront with the county registrar and just say, hey, this person handed the form to me, and before I was able to review it in their presence, they walked away. I wasn't able to find them again. I am turning this in, right? There is a possibility that some counties could actually terminate a VDR's appointment for doing that. The problem with that being that, a couple of problems. One is that different counties handle that differently. And so it's really important, if you're a VDR in a specific county, to try and get to know your county registrar and see if they're going to be, very strict about that, or if they're going to be more lenient about that, right? Will they allow the VDR to just say, hey, make sure you is it a slap on the wrist kind of thing where they're like, hey, make sure you talk to the applicant before they walk away? Or is it, you turn in this application that has a person who's 17 years, 3 months trying to register, you're terminated. Only way to do that is really to get to know the county registrar's office. Stella, I see.
Okay. My question is kind of question is kind of similar to that. Because I would think that in that situation where the person is 17 and 3 months, that you wouldn't have to accept the application. And here's why I'm saying it, because I actually have a blank form in front of me. And one of the first 3 questions that they have to answer has to do with age, and it says, will you be 18, on election day? And it says if you check no in response to either of the above, that is age, and if you're a U.S. citizen and all that, it says that they're not supposed to even fill out the form. So
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
have
No,
thought that.
you're absolutely right. And that's why I said it depends on whether that applicant is still there or if they walked away.
Okay.
Because if you have a completed application and no applicant there, even if you know, hey, they marked that they're only 17 years and 3 months, you have a completed application, you don't have the legal authority to say, oh, I can just throw this away, right? You can't just throw away an application. So yeah, if they are still there, you definitely can point that out and just say, hey, you're not actually eligible to vote. But there is still a chance that they would still give you the form and walk away. So basically what I'm saying is if you have a completed form, even if you know there's something like that on there, you have to turn in the completed forms. That is a higher priority. Because like I said, there are direct criminal penalties if you don't turn in a completed form. So yeah, that's why I was trying to say, Alexa, to your point, and to Stella, your point as well, or Priscilla, your point, and to Stella's point as well. There's no really good answer for it, and it puts VDRs in a bind. You're like, I can either turn in this form that I know isn't eligible to vote and potentially get my VDR certification stripped, or I can not turn in this form and face criminal penalties potentially. So it's a catch-22. There are no really good answers there.
And the other part to that too is that unfortunately sometimes we get conflicting information from the elections office, because
Yes.
there was someone in the elections office who said that if a person wants to fill out a form, you got to let them fill it out. And I'm thinking, well, not according to this application form. If they're the first three questions, if they answer no to any one of those questions, there it says on the form that they're not supposed to fill it out. But yet we've been told that you gotta let a person fill it out if they ask for it.
Right. And I honestly, I would agree more often than not. I would say that's probably the best advice to follow. But yeah, like I said, it is a catch-22. It really is. There's no good solution to that situation for a VDR. So for sure. Let's see. I have time for one more question, and then we got to wrap it up for the night. I'm getting a note from my Zoom room where it's going to close in about 5 minutes, so I don't want that to happen. Diane, can a voter change his or her address online? Yes, there are now methods for voters to go through the, I believe it's the DMV's website, update their voter registration application address. And then a voter registration form is messed up, a mistake is made. What do we do with the mistake? Tear up or shred? Ideally, you give it back to the applicant and they take care of it themselves. To be honest, that's the best solution to that. There isn't really a good solution if they've walked away again and you have that application. I would probably, I'm gonna just argue that it's an abundance of caution. You're probably going to want to return it to the county registrar and just say, hey, they messed up. I didn't have a way to do this. You're not supposed to be destroying the forms at all. So again, kind of goes back to the point that Priscilla and Stella and I were just talking about, that there's no really good solution for that. So, but yeah, so, all right, everyone. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you